Welcome back to Social 20-1. Now we're up to lesson 9, Ultranationalism. And after today's lesson, I want you to be able to define it, identify conditions that lead to the rise of ultranationalism, identify related perspectives within sources, and finally identify the reasons the Weimar Republic failed. First up, we're going to define ultranationalism within your notes. And there's the definition. Ultranationalism, an extreme form of nationalism. It's characterized by fanatic loyalty to one's own nation and hostile and racist attitudes towards other nations. So our second objective is, how does ultranationalism develop? Here are some factors that will lead to ultranationalism. Using Germany as an example, we see that economic factors can lead to the rise of ultranationalism. Within the Weimar Republic, there was an economic crisis associated with the Great Depression. As a result of the Great Depression, we'll see 6.1 million unemployed German people. Earlier, the Weimar Republic was destabilized in the first half of the 1920s due to the consequences of the Treaty of Versailles. Burdened with heavy war reparations, the young Weimar Republic government, facing these reparations, ended up inflating their economy by producing too much money to try to stimulate the economy with such a burden weighing it down. Other economic factors that hurt Germany would include losing some of their key industrial territories to France for a period of 15 years following the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. So losing the coal fields of the Saarland was another economic factor leading to ultranationalism's rise within the Weimar Republic. Also social factors. Ethnic tension and anti-Semitism were very specific to the story of the Weimar Republic. The Germans, before World War I, identified as having the best military in the world, but somehow they lose the war. So they end up creating different conspiracy theories. At the heart of many was some kind of stab in the back by non-German ethnic minorities living within their territory. And typically, those minorities would be Jewish people. And this will lead to the scapegoating and the ultimate genocide of them. We've already mentioned the unemployment and the tension and strain that that will have on the Weimar Republic. But there's also political factors. That as a consequence of World War I, we have a rise of militarism, the influence of the military and the alt-right within government, and their disease with the end of the war and their desire to restore their wounded pride. We have within Germany, within the Weimar Republic, great political polarization. We have extremists on both sides, reactionary fascists and radical communists, and therefore the government was weakened because there's very few moderates that had an interest in preserving the Weimar Republic. And finally, the new democracy emerging from the autocratic rule was forever associated with the defeat of World War I and the unjust treaty, and therefore the people had very little faith in the Weimar Republic at best, and at worst they saw them as criminals, as being guilty of treason, betraying the German people. We want you to be able to scan sources to identify perspectives with regards to ultranationalism. This says it's the only way out, Wilhelm, with the Central Press Association, Cleveland, Ohio. So the way to peace, and you have Wilson's 14 points. Well, these steps are very difficult to traverse. So the way to peace that has been laid out before the German people, and specifically Kaiser Wilhelm, will not lead to peace. Because the conditions of peace, the articles of Wilson, and let's keep in mind Wilson was the idealist. You know, a more accurate cartoon would be showing George Clemenceau's want for revanche. But here as well, we can see that, at least the perspective of the cartoonist, that it's the Treaty of Versailles that will help prevent peace. The conditions of the treaty itself will be so demanding of the German people that they won't be able to get to the end to achieve peace. Here we have Wilson attempting to provide his idealistic 14 points, and it's not Wilson that's to blame. This one blames Wilson's 14 points. This one makes Wilson to appear to be, maybe the adult in the room, with a vision of 14 points, but it's the chorus of others, the chorus of the English and the French and the Italians and the Polish and the Russians that are putting claims forth that is making the peace process more difficult. The infants presented to the umpire are labeled to represent the various claims of the English, French, Italian, Polish, Russian, and even the enemy. So it's making the idea, unlike this one, that the rise of extremism in Germany isn't America's fault, but it's the fault of so many competing claims at the end of World War I. There was just no consensus in Europe, and people were trying to get their pound of flesh, and in so doing created the seeds of a future conflict. This one's probably the most clear that we've seen so far. Germany here is absolutely being burdened with unrealistic reparations, and now the world is saying to Germany, now the difficulty will be collecting it from Germany, is the perspective. Like, you can make up any number you want. It's like, Austin Powers, we want $100 trillion. But the reality is, if you make the number so absurdly large and punishing, then you're going to make it difficult for Germany to repay it, and you're going to cause resentment. And as we learned in the last lesson, it ended up taking Germany decades to pay back the reparations. You've got to swallow it whether you like it or not, the peace terms. And you have America and Italy and Japan and France and the British Empire, forcing this medicine into Germany's mouth. And nobody likes things to be forced upon them, right? This is one I've seen on lots of tests before. Let's zoom in a little bit. Unlimited indemnity. So that's like unlimited indemnity means that the burden is unlimited. Like the weight is so heavy. So Germany is shown as this horse, and the horse can't make any ground if it can't reach the ground, right? So there's this discussion among the two whipping him, and this would be Lloyd George and George Clemenceau. Perhaps it would be better if we would, let it touch the earth. So you may remember that David Lloyd George from England was looking for, a middle ground. Maybe not the idealism of Wilson, but maybe not the extreme punishment of George Clemenceau. And this is what they're discussing here, is maybe the unlimited indemnity is so much that it's going to create problems within Germany and unrest. So now we're going to go to some notes that we have here. Why the Weimar Republic failed. Certainly you can read through them on your own, but I do want to highlight some key points. Weimar Republic was at the mercy of many different ideas and forces, political, economic, internal, external, structural, and short-term. And the architects of the Weimar democracy are often, the victims of this perfect storm of conditions that they had to face. The severity of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles will divide the German people, and ultimately the Nazis' rise will be due to their strong refusal to comply to those terms. So the consensus is that if Germany had been treated fairly, then the Weimar Republic may have had more support. Reparations burden on Germany was excessive. These obligations hampered Germany's post-war economic recovery, and a consequence undermined its political stability. And it didn't help when the French occupied the Ruhr to speed up the repayment, and the resulting hyperinflation crisis of 1923, which further destabilized the faith in the Weimar Republic. The fertile political environment in Weimar Republic allowed conspiracy theories to circulate, including the most famous stab-in-the-back theory that I've talked about how did we lose the war? Were we not winning? We're the Germans. We have the best military in the world. Literally our country was built on blood and iron. It just didn't make sense. They had to be betrayed by forces from within. Now keep in mind that some of the Weimar Constitution allowed for hefty emergency powers, not that different than what the Kaiser had enjoyed. So when Adolf Hitler eventually in 1933 invokes the Enabling Act, that was a constitutional move. That was within the realm of the Weimar Republic. Another flaw within the system was the proportional representation way of counting the votes, which allowed minority groups, the Nazis, to be able to create an inroad into parliament that they call Reichstag. So for the Weimar Republic electoral system, you didn't have to win any riding. All you had to do was have, 1/5 of 1% of popular vote for the entire country to get one of the 500 seats. And because of the proportional representation, no single party ever had an absolute majority, so we're going to have a series of unstable governments, coalitions are fragile, we're going to have multiple elections, and you're going to have democracy fatigue set in. You're going to have the electorate get tired of the constant campaigning, and then when the Nazis end up presenting a road to more stability, that seems ideal to them. Even though they lost the war, many military leaders, including Paul von Hindenburg, remained as national heroes. And the Nazis will associate quite closely with these ex-soldiers and leagues of them, like the Free Corps and the Reichswehr. Again, the impact of the Great Depression. By 1932, 2/5 of the German workforce, or some 6 million people, were without a job. So 2/5, 40%. In America, it was more like a third. So you can see how even in America, there's a lot of social, economic, political turmoil. And there was quite a significant shift in America from capitalism to kind of a mixed modern liberalism, where the New Deal introduced, a much more active role of government in the economy. Well, Germany's economy was struggling even more with unemployment. So even more of an extreme revolution in the role of government in the economy and in the political, social lives of the people isn't, totally absurd. And then there's some extra help there at the end if you want it. And then finally we have some sample multiple choice with the key asterisks for you. Again, this is just so you're like, okay, how am I going to get tested on this? Well, ultranationalism will appear on the multiple choice. You'll see it as an undertone in sources in an A1. It could be a key term in an A2. And when we study authoritarianism next year, we are going to be referring back to this concept. So this is one of those concepts that I can't have you just simply forget. Also in the world of today, we look around the world and we're beginning to see some of history echo. And we see elements of ultranationalism even among liberal democracies like the United States. We see some evidence of ultranationalism in some of the authoritarian or more authoritarian states like Russia and North Korea. And even though it seems obvious from our history here that ultranationalism ends up poisoning societies, it seems like in history we often need to learn our lessons multiple times.